and I'm with the Strategic Sourcing Program Office. I'm a category manager with the Security and Protection team, and I'll be presenting this morning along with my colleague, Ricardo Harrison. And Ricardo, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, I'm Ricardo Harrison. I work in the Strategic Sourcing Program Office, and my responsibility is the implementation of category management across DHS, and I look forward to our session today. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and if for whatever reason we forget to or we overlook a question, please feel free to reach out to myself or Amanda, and we'll be able to follow up with you offline.
Great, thanks, Ricardo. And there's no need for you to sign in to the chat pod. We're going to use that for our Q&A, so if you have a question or a need at any point during the presentation, feel free to use that, as Ricardo said, to communicate. But again, no need to sign in with your emails. And just a quick heads up, we are recording this session, so just want to give everybody that information as we begin. So today, what we hope is as you walk away from this presentation, we're going to talk about category management. So you'll have a good high-level overview understanding of what category management is, what's in it for you, and how it supports your program and enables the DHS mission. So again, as we walk away from today, we're hoping that that's what everyone's going to have as a takeaway here. So with the Strategic Sourcing Program Office, hopefully it's not a new term for you all in terms of who we are, that you have worked with us before. Most folks are familiar with us because of the DHS-wide contracts that are available, the strategic sourcing vehicles that are available. And you've either used them or perused our site to see if there's a solution that fits for you. And we are responsible for helping to maintain and develop those solutions for the department. But a lot of folks are not quite fully aware of all of the service offerings that we have available as well. We are a customer-based service organization, and we have a wide array of services available to help our customers find the best solutions to meet their needs. But what we're really here to talk about today is the implementation of category management, and our office is responsible for that implementation across the department. It's not unique to the department, it's also being implemented federal-wide. And so when we talk about implementing category management, we're talking about some strategies that we're starting to roll out. So some terms that may be new to you or that you may have heard of are strategies such as spend under management, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail here shortly. We're also talking about supplier relationship management. So how are we managing our relationships with our suppliers or with industry, and even the relationships that are within those relationships to help us really get to efficiencies and best solutions. We're talking about strategies related to knowledge sharing, so information that we can share across the department or even within government to help us find efficiencies. We're also talking about demand management. So what are those behaviors, consumption behaviors, that we can change, or the drivers or things that impact those consumption behaviors to help us manage our demand. And we're also taking a look at our requirements across the department. So looking at a lot of analysis to determine what we need and how we need it. So all of those roll up into, when we talk about implementation of category management strategies, things that we are putting into effect. Now when it comes to what is category management, defining it, it's a strategic approach that enables the federal government to acquire and manage common goods and services more efficiently and like a single enterprise. So essentially at a high level, kind of a loose term, would be buying as one. So federal government, again, is looking at this, and then within the department, we're implementing it as well. And category management is not a new strategy. It's been around for a long time. It's been existent within industry in terms of implementation. But in order to enable category management, we kind of have to look at how we're actually categorizing things. And so what you see here is a representation of the DHS categories. And when we say category, we're referring to a group of spends that's based on similarity among the types of goods and services being purchased. So we have 9 different categories within DHS, IT being our largest area of spend, followed by professional services, security and protection, and so forth here represented. And so the Strategic Sourcing Program Office, we're largely organized similarly to this categorical structure. And so we have folks like I mentioned that I am part of the security and protection team. So as we oversee portfolios, we align to this structure as well. And when it comes to defining category management, the what behind category management and defining it is usually not something that's difficult for folks. It's usually the why. So why are we implementing category management? So wanting to talk through that a little bit here. And so we'll start with policy. So policy driven by OMB. They have implemented policy on implementing category management federal-wide. And so it's not only an administration priority, but it's also written into the President's management agenda, which sets goals for each department or agency to follow. So in short, we have to, would be sort of a why, but when we look at it further and deeper into that, we see that there's a lot more to it than just that. So if we actually take a look at requirements, and I'll kind of combine that with benefits here, when we come together to really discuss our common needs and best practices, we can actually start to look at appropriate sourcing strategies to help us get to not just the best solution, but sometimes the right solution. So what really drives category management is taking a look at requirements across the department to be able to find and identify innovations, efficiencies, any gaps, capability gaps or bridges to basically help us get to what the right solutions are and really help improve mission delivery. And then in addition to that, people really drive category management as well. So we have folks that are executing a lot of these strategies, but at the same time we have overlap with, we have commodity councils that are in existence that take a look at efficiencies, executives, leadership, and then we have our, our acquisition workforce that are really implementing this. So all of that together drives category management across the department. And so what that looks like in terms of what's required of us or some of those actions that are behind category management being driven. So I mentioned the policy that's been implemented. So part of that policy requires our department to respond in a few ways. And so one of those is through annual category management goals. And so we're always looking to increase our spend under management. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, as I mentioned. But that's one of our required actions is actually to look at our spend under management and find ways that we can increase it. We're also looking at ways to engage industry and vendors. And by engagement, we don't mean just necessarily a meeting, but finding effective ways to really engage strategies on how we can better engage with industry to improve outcomes and reduce risk. We're also looking at ways to implement demand management strategies. So again, looking at our consumption behaviors and are there changes that we can make or new things that we can implement in order to help better manage our demand. We're also required to share data. So whether that's information on solutions that we have available, or sometimes it could be information related to requirements or best practices, any information that can really help us in the sharing department is something that we're required to do. And then in the final action, it's training our workforce on category management, which is essentially what we're doing right now. So helping to inform and educate the workforce on category management principles and strategies in order to help essentially get to improving our decision-making process and informing our process on those decisions that we make in the acquisition arena. So that's a lot of information and just, yes.
We have a quick point of clarification from Gary. He just wanted to make sure to clarify, you said the right solution, not necessarily the best solution. He wants to maybe hear that correctly.
So, yeah. So always looking for the best solution, but in some cases, we're always looking for, we may not actually have the right solution in place. So we're also looking for, they would be one and the same. So right and best. Does that help, Gary?
I'm going to answer for him and said yes. Yep. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, there's a little bit of lag time with technology here. Okay, so a lot of information in just a few minutes. I apologize if I've been talking fast. So we're just going to do a quick pop quiz here. Oh, no, we don't have the pop quiz. I apologize. Lucky for you, audience, we don't have the pop quiz. So we are actually going to move into our achieving SUM and BIC goals here. So I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time on this slide just because the concepts that we're talking about here can get a little complicated, but they're also possibly new for some folks. So when I say SUM, we're talking about our spend under management. And when I say BIC, we're talking about our best in class. So some of you may have heard of best in class contracts, BIC contracts across the government. And so that's what we're talking about here. And this visual is a help for us to basically talk about how we are trying to look at taking one of these paths in achieving our spend under management goals. So I previously mentioned we had agency goals, annual goals, and those are further sub-allocated down to the component level. So every component has annual SUM goals. And so when we're looking at finding a right solution, we have to take into consideration how we are looking at achieving our sum and bit goals here. So when we have a common requirement, the goal that we have is to consider taking one of these paths, the Tier 1, the Tier 2, or the Tier 3 path to achieve our goals here. So I'll walk through each one of these and kind of talk through. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in the chat pod there. So our Tier 1 solutions are our agency-wide strategic sourcing vehicles. So if a solution has been deemed agency-wide, it fits within that Tier 1 category there. Now, there is also something on the newer side. It's an agency-approved small business path, which fits under Tier 1. Not to get too into the weeds on here, but these are for those purchases with small businesses that are local and decentralized. And so essentially when we have a situation like this, the Strategic Sourcing Program Office will work with the component level POC to determine if there's certain criteria that that particular purchase has met, where we can then go to OMB and seek credit for Tier 1 for that particular buy. It's not common and it's newer. So if anybody has questions about that, you can feel free to let us know. But for Tier 1, for the majority, what we're wanting to think about are those agency-wide strategic sourcing vehicles. Now, Tier 2 are those government-wide contracts, multi-agency contracts, or the best really example are GSA schedules. So those are government-wide, and if they fall into one of those types of solutions, it would be categorized or classified as a Tier 2 solution. And then a Tier 3 solution are those best-in-class contracts. So there are some contracts within the government that undergo this rigorous review and designation process in order to be considered best-in-class. And OMB has defined certain criteria that they consider to designate something as a best-in-class solution. And if it meets that criteria, then it will receive the BIC designation. And if you utilize that as a solution, we can get considered for Tier 3 credit for that. And they're reviewed on an annual basis, and as I mentioned, it's pretty rigorous criteria to be considered as a BIC. And our DHS portfolio of strategic sourcing vehicles is comprised of actually all three tiers. We have Tier 1 because they're agency-wide. We do have Tier 2 solutions, and we do have best-in-class solutions within our portfolio as well. So as DHS users, we should be considering the contract solutions that are under our strategic sourcing portfolio first, because that will get us our sum, help us to achieve our sum and our BIT goals as well. But we also recognize that not all requirements can be supported by a sum solution. Each component has unique mission needs that have to be met. However, we just want to make sure that folks understand that the Tier 0, though they may not be aligned to our spend here with the Tier 1, 2, and 3, that those Tier 0 solutions should still be strategic and justified. So as we're making decisions on the solution that we're using, that we have considered how we are trying to achieve our sum and BIC goals there. And I'll stop there for a moment because I know, like I said, this can tend to be a complicated subject, and I think we might have some questions there, Ricardo. I don't know if we need to address or you're able to kind of field.
Yep, there is just one question as to what kind of criteria is for BIC. Do you want me to take that? Or?
Yeah, sure, you can take it.
For BIC right, so for the BIC criteria, these are really specified by OMB, and sometimes they've changed. I think they're actually in the process of changing them, but specifically, it is how much the contract vehicle can demonstrate use of category management and performance strategy. So that includes a lot of like the pricing strategy that goes into it, whether it has sufficient small business participation, and using all of that, it uses independent validation to determine if that contract vehicle is really meeting those specific criteria. And one of the big one is, again, the pricing strategy. Can we demonstrate appropriate pricing and savings that we're getting from that contract vehicle? So hopefully that answers the question for Preeti. And let me see if there's another one. So we have a question from Gary. How does this overlap or work with the move towards shared services and QSMOs? Gary, I'm not exactly sure what specifically you are referring to, but not every service that we are every contract vehicle that we have right now, our requirement actually will qualify for a shared services contract vehicle. So for right now, it's two separate things, and we haven't determined if there's an overlap between use of our contract vehicles and if somebody in DHS were to use our shared services. But that's a good question.
Okay. And Ricardo is going to talk a little bit more towards the latter half of the presentation on how to work with our office, but I'll just plug really quickly as well. If you ever have a question on meeting your agency's SUM or BIT goals, you can always feel free to reach out to our office, to one of our category managers to discuss that or to find lists of possible solutions for consideration within the portfolio for DHS or even outside of that if necessary. So I'll just make that quick plug there. Moving forward, so also want to talk a little bit here about the value that strategic sourcing delivers to DHS. So in FY 2019, DHS spent about $8.9 billion on goods and services that are available through strategic sourcing and best-in-class contract vehicles. And about 60% of that is what we actually spent on strategic sourcing and best-in-class contract vehicles, which is great news because what that amounted to was about $601 million saved. So I know savings can kind of be a buzzword sometimes, but with those savings, what that essentially means is those dollars can then be reallocated to help advance mission-specific needs. And so since FY 2005, the department has saved about $5.2 billion. So that's pretty significant in terms of the value that's added and brought through strategic sourcing. And so wanted to definitely share that, but instead of just kind of relaying the dollar value as well, we thought it would be beneficial to have real folks come in and actually talk about their personal experience with offering that value. And so we have 3 guest speakers with us this morning as well from some of our components here who are going to talk a little bit about that. So first up, I'd like to introduce Mr. John Pacia, who is the Assistant to the Special Agent in Charge with U.S. Secret Service Raleigh Training Center. And John serves as the Firearms Program Manager for the Secret Service and oversees firearms policy and training curriculum, as well as the development, acquisition, and sustainment operations associated with Secret Service firearms, technologies, and modernization projects. So it sounds like John is related to all things firearms for Secret Service, and he's going to be here with us this morning to share about his experience with using our 9mm handgun contract. So John, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? I'm unable to connect via Adobe, so I'm in on a telephone bridge line. So hopefully I'm coming across loud and clear. Thank you for the introduction. As you can see, there's quite a bit that goes on my business card. So I wanted to briefly discuss a success story here for the Secret Service regarding the use of strategic source vehicles. So back in late 2017, the Secret Service leadership approved moving forward with a program to refresh our existing handgun fleet. We have approximately 10,000 handguns in inventory spread out amongst our workforce, and we were reaching a scenario where most of them were out of warranty spec, and some of them were approaching approximately a third of our fleet was approaching excess of 15 years old. So we were starting to see failures in design just from overuse. There was no existing Secret Service contract to refresh that fleet in any manner, so we went back to the drawing board and started looking at developing our own requirements for what we considered our next generation handgun. If there's any firearms experts listening in today, technology has changed greatly since we first adopted our legacy platform back in 1998. Which allows for greater flexibility and greater modularity with handgun systems to meet modern threat environments. We started our requirements preparation in early 2018 when we got wind that our partners over at Customs and Border Protection, specifically their Harpers Ferry branch, were also developing requirements for a new handgun system for a lot of similar reasons. So thankfully, with our relationships with that crew, we were able to get in on the ground floor and kind of combine our own requirements into theirs. There's a lot of back and forth, and certainly CBP afforded us an opportunity to greatly expand buying power. Secret Service currently employs about 6,000 to 7,000 gun carriers. Customs and Border Protection gun carriers number in excess of 35,000. So certainly we recognize that as the ability to really stretch our dollars if we were able to partner with them. But we didn't want to commit just yet. They certainly had requirements that were unique to them and their mission set. Nevertheless, we partnered with them early on, and then as their requirements and acquisition strategies started to become fleshed out and more apparent, they instituted some novel techniques regarding weapons acquisition that nobody had really done before, which we recognized as somewhat revolutionary in terms of having the offerers provide initial test data at their expense rather than placing that onus and that significant resource allocation back on the government. Government still reserved the right to perform any and all validation testing to try to recreate any results that the offerers submitted. By 2019, fiscal year 19, we had received approval to proceed and had obligated or had allocated funding in pursuit of this effort. CBP subsequently awarded their contract in April of last year, 2019, for a 10-year contract with an estimated value of $85 million if fully executed. We also recognize that this was significantly larger and of longer term than the Secret Service would likely have been able to procure ourselves. So we, again, went back to CBP. They agreed to let us perform validation testing of their awarded handgun fleet to ensure that it met all of our requirements as well. That was successful, and then we were able to proceed with ordering off of their contract, and then other DHS units have since followed based on our test results, CBP's original test results, and of course the total value of that contract and the duration of that contract being a 10-year hitch. So it really does serve as a great example of some of the stuff that has already been discussed this morning as far as that identifying that best-in-class opportunity, both from a independent validation testing, both interagency, intergovernment, and third-party, the pricing structure and the buying power recognized by CBP early on just within their own components, but then with the communication with other DHS components that might be interested to really drive that per unit price down it equates to approximately 50% of what the Secret Service had budgeted over the course of the next 3 to 5 years to refresh our fleet. And those are not insignificant numbers, and with everybody struggling for dollars, that's funding that we were able to subsequently reallocate to other parts of our program to refresh other technologies. Certainly, the other part of that contract that was awarded that's of benefit is it was fairly large in scope for firearms anyway, and afforded not just the base handgun, but a variety of different models of handgun to be able to adapt to different specific mission sets, all sustainment parts and pieces and all the other widgets that go into it for the duration of the contract, again, at very competitive pricing. So the Secret Service was able to take advantage of that. We executed an initial delivery award in 2019 for about $1.3 million for the first year. We're looking at just under that again for FY20. Certainly our ability to onboard those deliverables and retrain our workforce has obviously been impacted by the events of the last 3 months ourselves, but I think we're still on track to be able to turn over our entire fleet within the next 2 to 3 years and touch all of our gun-carrying workforce nationwide. So it really has been a great example, like I said, and a success story of early on identifying those common requirements between agencies, whether that's done through councils and teams or in our case specifically, really just a cultivation of interagency relationships between relative SMEs and individual like-minded teams to really let the customers identify each other and identify those common requirements and partner early on. We could not have accomplished it without our existing relationship with CBP. I think we would have been lost early on. But once that took off, again, the linking it into a best-in-class example fit right in with all the other data that was developed during that solicitation and the resulting testing. So that's all I got. I can take a breath now.
Thanks, John, for sharing that. That is a really good example, I think, of how we can partner within the department to find those efficiencies and leverage buying power for sure. And I really quickly want to apologize. I meant to navigate through the slides for those folks who are joining us via audio. So we are on slide 10. Make sure to do that going forward. But also with us this morning, we have Mr. Sam Alvord, who is the Chief of Office of Energy Management at U.S. Coast Guard. Sam works within the Assistant Commandant for Engineering and Logistics and is responsible for developing and implementing tactical vehicle and facility energy strategies. And Sam's going to be sharing with us his experience on using our emergency fuel supplies and services strategic sourcing vehicle. So Sam, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for dialing in and taking the time to learn about this. So really this effort was born out of the terrible trifecta of 2017 where Dorian, Irma, and Maria strained the whole of government response, particularly the NORTHCOM, NORAD, DLA Energy, DHS, FEMA integration efforts in response to those 3 back-to-back hurricanes. So right around that time, we had a long list of lessons learned. We started collaborating, CBP, ICE, Coast Guard, and said, okay, what do we need? What do we want? And let's start designing that solution. So started looking at this strategic sourcing category management approach. And really what I'll say is a differentiator is it is, petroleum as a service, not necessarily as a commodity. And that's an evolution in the way that we manage those emergency services and how we maintain and sustain DHS mission. But essentially, for those that are hesitant to use these kinds of tools, what I'll say is this process gave us insight into business models across the range of the energy industry, so all the way from the refinery to the brokers that control the cash, the wholesalers that keep the fuel in bulk storage, down to the actual truck driver, what most people call as the supplier. The supplier in many cases is not necessarily the supplier or the contract holder that you think it is. But we talked to all those kinds of different folks as part of this process. We talked to logistics companies, who their primary objective is to take something from point A to point B. They don't really care what they're transporting. But it really helped us by going through and establishing this IDIQ, helped us get feedback from industry on a one-on-one manner that I'm not sure we would have gotten otherwise. We specifically asked companies, why don't you bid on DLA Energy contracts? Why do you want to bid on DHS contracts? And we learned a lot. Took some time. We spent the necessary weeks to have a draft PWS posted on FedBizOps for industry review, but I think it ultimately showed our commitment to the long-term solution at a worldwide level. there's worldwide coverage, CONUS and OCONUS, and there's massive complexity between those two solutions. We have done contract awards in the case of Hurricane Dorian within about 4 hours from we emailed the PWS and what we needed and wanted to the companies listed on the IDIQ and had a fully executed contract award within 4 hours on a Friday before a long weekend. So it can be expeditious, but I think more importantly is it's tailored, and the long-term relationships that you establish with this category management and with these companies is that they know you better than maybe you know you in some cases. So there is an increased degree of collaboration because they consider themselves to be long-term partners to the DHS enterprise. Most recently, as of yesterday morning, we awarded a contract for a detailed plan. So again, energy as a service that requires some planning of that service, knowing that the 2020 hurricane season is going to be a little different from both an intensity perspective and with respect to COVID-19. We're now in the process of polishing and refining the actual delivery modes of those critical energy commodities to our installation. So, how do you keep the truck drivers isolated so that they don't pose a risk to the personnel on the installation, but more importantly, so that they don't pose a risk to themselves and take themselves out of the game? Because if we need them to be making deliveries, then that's their number one thing to support us. So we're starting to again, embrace the full range of solutions from detailed plans to actual delivery of product to mitigation measures and everything in between. That's all I have. Any questions?
Great. Thanks, Sam. Yes, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat pod. But yeah, definitely I think a great example of category management at work, especially given the urgent mission needs that we have within the department and how we're addressing those, and especially with your engagement with industry there. So lastly, we have this morning with us Rick Travis, who's a contracting officer with CBP. Rick serves as the administrative contracting officer for our department-wide Uniforms 2 contract, and he's also instrumental in leading the DHS Uniforms Commodity Council. And so here on slide 11, Rick is actually going to be talking through our DHS commodity councils that are in existence here. So Rick, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Appreciate the introduction. A long time ago when I got hired by CBP back in 2004, I didn't really expect to be responsible for strategic sourcing items, but in 2005 I was asked to take over body armor, which was CBP's first foray into doing strategic source contracting. And one of the things that I found right off the bat, and again, this is 15 years ago, was that even though we had a commodity council, it was really somewhat new to the whole process. We really had only done one item of significance, and that was the pistol contract back then, the preceding document to the one Mr. Pescia talked about. So we didn't have a lot of experience, and one of the things that we found, particularly with coordination amongst the different agencies within DHS, was they all bought their own items, and that's to be expected. We were put together in kind of a hodgepodge format initially, and so we didn't really have that structure. The Commodity Council looked at the requirements, and one of the things we found was that there were two basic types of armor we procured, Level 2 and Level 3A. I won't bore you with the reasons the armor was being bought, but across the different groups, ICE, CBP, Secret Service, the difference in the types of body armor led to differences in price, differences in delivery types, differences in vendors, and very little consistency among the wearers. Within DHS, you do get a lot of transfer back and forth between agencies, and so the armor then, if you move from one group to the next, wasn't really usable because sometimes you have different levels, and each agency seemed to have their own thoughts as to what that level should be. So early on, the question that was posed to the council, particularly by myself and the program manager for body armor, was why do we have these distinctions in armor type? And really, it was just a historical legacy of the different pieces of the puzzle. It wasn't anything that was scientific or logical. It was just there. So the Commodity Council sat down for quite a bit of time working with different components, and we agreed to a strategy of only buying one type of armor. That strategy is still in existence today. And one of the things it allowed us to do was sit down and say, okay, we've got one type of armor. We're going to be buying 75,000 and 90,000 pieces of armor over a 5-year period. The newer contract, I believe, is actually 7 years. But it allowed us to sit down and say, we're only going to buy one type of armor. This did a number of things for us. It simplified the source selection process. For those of you that have been involved with source selection, how difficult it is to begin with, having multiple types to look at adds another level of complexity. It doesn't mean that it can't be done or that it's impossible. It's one more thing to throw into the mix that creates uncertainty in how you do things. But because the Commodity Council got together and worked together, we were able to settle on a single type of armor. We were able to do it as a small business set-aside, which benefits a number of things within our organization. But we were also able to get a much lower price for this armor across the board. And that ability to leverage the combined requirements, and again, this goes similar to what the gentleman from Secret Service said, we try to combine our requirements and make it such that we're able to leverage our buying ability. Obviously, buying 75,000 pieces versus 40,000 pieces, that's a pretty healthy jump, and it gives us a negotiation benefit or price benefit that we've carried forward. The advantage of having, again, the Commodity Council is being able to do this in such a way that we're coordinated. We function as one DHS. I remember that used to be what we thought our motto was going to be. I don't know if it is or not, but from a buying perspective, it makes the most sense. Going forward, I'm now in charge of uniforms. I'm the contracting officer for uniforms for all of DHS. And we've recently started a Commodity Council that will look at combining items. Unlike body armor, which is basically a single item with a few peripheral things attached, uniforms is the opposite. It has nearly 1,700 line items on the contract, a variety of hats, coats, boots, shirts, pants. And the fact of the issue is every component has their own views as to what should be done. The problem is we don't look at them from the standpoint of why are we buying 5 different polo shirts in some cases. And over the next 6 months, my fervent hope is to slowly whittle down the numbers on the contract by combining things. Because what it does in reality for our officers and agents is that it allows them to do something very important. It allows them to spend their dollars because we give them the money, at least in the organizations that have allowance accounts. It allows them to buy items at a lower price and therefore expand their allowance use. At the end of the day, the Commodity Council's benefits, and they're shown here, right, it is to generate a leverage point for contracting officers or for components, maybe even a better way to say it, by lowering the prices and spending less time doing administration and more time doing thinking that allows us to do a better job for our folks. And I will say this, I've been on 2 Commodity Councils, the WAC, and now I think those are incredibly funny acronyms, but at the end of the day, both serve a purpose, and that purpose is to make the most use of DHS's capabilities. So we're a big agency. We should be able to use a big club when we go to buy things. And I hope that going forward is going to work with uniforms as well as it did for body armor. So that's my story, and I'm going to stick to it.
Thank you, Rick. Yes, completely agree with you that our Commodity Councils, they're a great opportunity to really sometimes start collaboration and definitely build forward. So just for awareness purposes, there are 3 Commodity Councils that are currently in existence within the department for folks to understand. So there's the WAC, as Rick mentioned, which is our Weapons Ammunition Commodity Council, the UC, which is our Uniforms Commodity Council, and then we also have the Detection Equipment Commodity Council. So if anybody has any questions on those, we'd be happy to address them offline. But thank you, gentlemen, for your time today and for sharing all of that helpful information and definitely helping us to understand more about the value of how category management is currently at work within the department. We are going to go ahead and move forward here on getting into some more details on the Strategic Sourcing Program Office, and I'm going to turn it over to Ricardo to go over that information with you.
All right, thank you very much, Amanda. Before I get into the slides that I have to cover, I just wanted to address Joanna Brown Downer's question, which is with all this quantity buying, are we losing quality in products? Do we follow up when quality is below standard? So I will say this, Joanna, no, that's actually one of the key tenets of what we do in category management is to make sure that we are still getting quality products. So sometimes we talk about we are saving, but we want to make sure that sometimes it's better value because of that quality that we're looking for. So we're not necessarily getting cheaper prices because of the economies of scale that we're getting. However, if you are purchasing products, for example, office supplies, and you find out that the quality that you're getting is not up to standards, please let us know, because as the end user out in the field buying those products, it is important for us to know that so that we can have that conversation with the contract holders to make sure that the product that they're delivering is good for us. And if it's not, then we'll work with the contracting officers to make sure that that situation is rectified. But no, I do not believe that we are, whether it is for a commodity or if it's for a service, we definitely do not want to compromise quantity over quality. So hopefully that helps. So just to go through my slides in the next 15 minutes, hopefully I can get through those. I just want to let everyone know that, and this is another plug, that we actually do these category management 101 sessions throughout the year, or if you want us to come out and brief your specific component or specific group, we are able to do that as well. Usually this briefing could take an hour and a half to 2 hours sometimes, depending on the audience. So if you want to schedule one, I am the point person for that, so you can always reach out to me. We also had another question about if somebody wanted to collaborate across DHS. There's actually, at the end of this briefing, I will cover how that works so that you guys have that information to work from. So with that, I wanted to make sure that if you take nothing away from today's briefing, the one thing that we do want to stress is that we want to be your partner on your procurement journey. And so with that, we know that there's plenty of options, and sometimes it's very confusing when you have a requirement. So whether you are a requirement holder or you're a contracting officer, you have a requirement and you're just not sure where to begin, we are encouraging you to start with SSPA. And I know that although most of our SSVs are subject to the DHS Manager for Use policy, I don't want you to think that you have to use an SSV. So our goal today is to make sure that we help you get to the right solution for your requirement. So whether that's going to be a solution that is part of our portfolio or if it's going to be a solution that is elsewhere, let's start with the Strategic Sourcing Program Office so that we can help you along that journey. So with that, I do want to point out that there are over 70 DHS-wide strategic sourcing contract vehicles that are currently in place across DHS. In the file pod below, there is a handout that, and I'm going to pull it up right here for you, that you can see. So if you go to page 2, and I apologize for the folks who can't see the slides today, but these were emailed to everyone, so it's the attachment that says handout SSPO offerings and strategic sourcing vehicles. So on page 2, this actually lists our entire portfolio of DHS-wide strategic sourcing contract vehicles, and it covers a large depth and breadth of potential requirements that DHS folks could have across the board. They include DHS-developed contract vehicles, which is based on DHS-specific needs and mission requirements by cross-component expertise. And then we have another set of contract vehicles that we refer to as the DHS-adopted vehicles. And this is where, when it makes sense, and in the spirit of category management, we will adopt some government-wide contract vehicles that were developed by other government agencies and bring them into the DHS portfolio, which would still be subject to the Manager for Use policy. And we don't just adopt any vehicle and bring them in. We actually do a thorough analysis, and we work with different SMEs, specifically requirements holders and also our small business shop, to make sure that the vehicles that we are adopting actually fits the need of DHS. So some examples of what we've done in the past is we've adopted Oasis, and Oasis was the replacement vehicle for TABs, for people who are familiar with TABs, and that's because we did an analysis and determined that all the requirements that we had under TABs could be fulfilled on the Oasis plus much more. And so we decided to forego competing tabs and adopted Oasis. Most recently, and this is another plug, there is a session today called Eagle Next Year's Overview. So if you haven't signed up for that, I recommend that you guys attend this meeting, especially if you're in the IT contracting world, where we did an analysis, including with the CIO shop and our Osdibu office, to make a determination that we would not recompete Eagle, but instead we would have an umbrella portfolio of IT services contract vehicle, which is now called Eagle Next Gen. So if you want to know more about Eagle Next Gen, I encourage you to join us at 1 o'clock for that briefing. So this handout, you can take a look at it. Right now, it just includes the name of the vehicles, but as I will discuss in subsequent slides, there's actually we have a website for each of these vehicles that will give you much more information on these vehicles. Moving on, I am now on slide 14. So as mentioned, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to using our strategic sourcing contract vehicles. They were made mandatory because there was a lot of effort that were put into these because we believe, according to the cross-component experts that worked on these contract vehicles, that they support a specific DHS mission. And they offer a lot of benefits, including just prevent vendors to make sure that we get that quality that we were talking about earlier, and have DHS-specific terms and conditions, and ideally lower prices. So although there were mandates for use, there actually are 2 exceptions if a component decides that none of the SSVs can potentially support their need. So the first and easiest of them is the exception process. So there is one of 7 exceptions that can be cited that requires no formal review by SSPO in order for you to move forward with your procurement packages. For example, a lot of components right now might be using the Stafford Act, so which is because we're in a pandemic, so that one is required by statute. You have to make a purchase immediately to support a urgent need right now. You know, that is something that you can move forward. You don't necessarily have to use a contract vehicle because of the time and effort that might be required in order to use that. There's also sources specified by regulation, Ability 1, for example. The only advice I'd provide to that is sometimes look at our vehicles because we do have Ability 1 partners in some of our contract vehicles, so just keep that in mind. And another one that I can talk about a little bit more is just the achievement of socioeconomic goals. If your component realizes that you're coming towards the 3rd, 4th quarter and you're not going to meet certain socioeconomic goals, specifically hub zone is one of the harder ones to meet, and using our vehicle wouldn't allow you to meet that goal, then you can cite that as an exception so that you can get to that hub zone vendor that you need in order to meet your goal. And so the next way is the waiver process. And this one is a little bit more involved. It does require some effort and justification on your end. But the key takeaway here is that you coordinate early with the Strategic Sourcing Program Office so that if you if you're considering potentially submitting a waiver request because you have a requirement that you don't believe you should have to use an SSV for, we want you to have a discussion with the Strategic Sourcing Program Office early or in the process so that we can help guide you through that process. And so moving to slide 15, I'll explain why that is the case or why we want you to do that coordination. So this slide is covering just the order of precedence for using SSVs and best-in-class contract vehicles, or to sort of help you make a determination. And again, I apologize that I have to rush through this, mindful of your time. So if you have a requirement and it's in the scope of an SSV, then you need to use that SSV, unless, of course, as I mentioned, you qualify for that exception. And if it's still in scope and you don't think you need it, for example, if you need to put in place a 5-year BPA because you have certain requirement and you can't just place a task order, you actually need this BPA in place, then that is grounds for why you might need to get a waiver away from using our contract vehicle. And that one is very, very straightforward. And so in that case, you would coordinate with us and we'll say, okay, yes, that makes sense, and you'd go through the waiver process. If you're granted if you are granted a waiver, if you're granted a waiver, then what we'd encourage you to do, so let's tie this back together with the achieving your SUM and best-in-class contract goals. If we want to tie this together, it's once you get a waiver, we would encourage you to first consider using another government-wide or BIC contract solution, because doing so will still help your component and help DHS meet its spend under management goal and also its best-in-class contract utilization goal. And if not, then look at a tier 2 solution, so maybe a GSA schedule, so any of the MACs or GWACs or any MACs or GWACs out there. And using that, even if you're not using something within the DHS portfolio, that will help us to still get some spend under management credit. So that's why we are encouraging everyone to make sure that you coordinate with us and so that we can help you down your path. And obviously, if none of these solutions can work out for you, then at least we're making that justified exception so that you can go full and open or procure your services in some other manner. So I'm going to pause for a second to see if Amanda have any questions for me.
Yeah, there's two in the chat pod. The first is from Mark Adams. I don't know if you want to read it or I might read it to you.
Yeah, I'm reading it right now. Can you discuss a bit on requisition versus acquisition, where strategic sourcing is great for requisition, but acquisition needs RDT&E and modifications to acquire HSC capability? So I'm not too familiar with some of these acronyms, Mark. And we may have to follow up with you offline to go into details. But the thing is that the contracting officer will actually help you. So I'm assuming that your requirement older. I'm assuming. So in this case, so you can actually do some acquisition. I'm assuming that you're referring to, when it comes on to R&D, the big A's. And if that's the case, there are some R&D stuff that you can actually do under our SSVs. But without knowing specifically what your requirement is, I'm not sure I can answer that question specifically right now on this call. What is the other question? Okay. So
the other question was addressed.
Okay. So for the good of the group, Tasha's question is to clarify, if your requirement is not in scope of an SSV, none of this applies. So it means that you do not need to, you're not required to use, at least you're not held to the policy to use a DHS contract vehicle that's within our portfolio. However, and this is the point I was trying to make, so I'm glad Tasha brought up this question. Even if your requirement is not within the DHS portfolio, we still would like to encourage you to consider using another government-wide best-in-class contract vehicle or a tier 2 set of contract vehicles, so whether that's a MAC, GWAC, or a schedule. So say for instance, you decided that your requirement is not within scope of OASIS, but for some reason, and this is very extraneous, but for some reason, you can actually make that purchase under the professional services schedule, then we would want you to use the professional services schedule versus going open market. Because if you do use the professional services schedule, then your component and DHS overall will be contributing to its spend under management goal. So hopefully that helps. All right. I am going to move on to slide 16. So with slide 16, this is just trying to let us know that sometimes there are actually overlaps in some of our contract vehicles. For example, we have HCAS and OASIS, where for the most part, you can actually purchase training and human capital solutions under OASIS. However, we have HCAS in place because those vendors were specifically vetted and are supposed to have the expertise for human capital and training solutions. So in that case, we want to make sure that if you're looking for something specific for training needs, then you'd use HCAS. But that's not to say that you couldn't use OASIS. But that is a determination that you'd have to do by just looking at the scope and your specific need that you're looking for. Another thing to consider is just the contract details. Does it have sufficient, when I issue that solicitation, does it have or afford me enough competition? What's the pricing structure like? is there going to be enough socioeconomic opportunities for set-asides on that vehicle? And the next thing to consider, and these are in no order of preference, by the way, but the next thing to consider is if you're just not sure, what we encourage people to do is just to determine the vendor capabilities, call them up, decide and talk to them about, hey, can you support this requirement? Can you not support this requirement? And you can always, of course, go the formal route of issuing an R5 to determine, what's the best vendor to use. All right, I see I have some more questions. So Gary is asking, if something is on a strategic sourcing vehicle and in DHS Advantage, can we just use DHS Advantage? So I think for the most part, for that one, you're talking about our FFSI, so for office supplies, absolutely. That will count towards using our SSV because we actually have adopted that vehicle within our portfolio. Hopefully that answers your question, Gary. So just to wrap up, I know we're right at 10 a.m. We're actually available on DHS Connect. So slide 17 will show you how to get to us, and each portfolio actually have its own dedicated website where it has its own vehicle. And on those websites, you can find out all the details about a specific contract vehicle, what's in scope, whether it's mandatory for use or not, and most importantly, it also has ordering guides for the most part, so to help you guys be able to place task orders against that vehicle. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, this is the contact information for all of the category managers across DHS. If you know specifically what portfolio of services or products you're looking for, you can reach out directly to the category manager as listed, and they are pretty responsive. They'll always get back to you. If you are looking for training, or if you just have a general question and you're not sure where to go, you can always reach out to me, or you can always reach us at on our website. We have our link to our main inbox, and somebody will always respond to you. So with that, I am going to end today's call and see if there's any more questions. Again, I do want to remind everyone that we have a 10:30 session coming up with our Chief Procurement Officer giving the keynote address, and it's going to be a great lively discussion with a few panelists from across the department that are going to share their success stories about working with category management and also offering up some advice to you. This is the Adobe link for it, so whether you're registered or not, you can still join us. You probably just won't get any credit, but just want to let you know that that opportunity is out there, and hopefully you can join us today. So if there are no other questions, thank you very much for joining us.